right. Time for a short lecture on the rise of political democracy in America. You might also note that today I'm repping the Singer-Songwriters Guild. So if you are a singer or a songwriter, reach out, join our Remind. I'll post it right here. And come to our meetings. We're excited to be preparing some performances. So if you are a singer or a songwriter or a musician or just interested in those things, reach out. Okay, my shameless plug is over. Now let's talk about politics, namely the rise of political democracy in America and the development of what historians and political scientists refer to as the second party system. The rise of the second party system was defined by the rise of an unlikely war hero turned politician named Andrew Jackson. And Mr. McCarty will get into more detail on Andrew Jackson in a later lecture. Let's do a quick review to start. A quick review of political parties in America. You may remember that George Washington warned against the rise of political parties in his farewell address. You might also remember that the first two parties developed in his cabinet while he was president. A little bit ironic. The unresolved disputes between the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists evolved into those first two political parties. They became known as the Federalists, the Hamiltonian Federalists, and the Jeffersonian Republicans. You might also recall that the Federalist Party is going to die during the War of 1812. This led to a period known as the Era of Good Feelings. It's a pretty inaccurate moniker, since even though there was only one major political party at the time, the country remained pretty divided on a lot of the same issues that had divided them from the beginning. So that brings us to the second party system. And in order to understand the second party system, we need to understand the movement in America towards political democracy. So what is political democracy? This simply means that the citizens, or at least the voting citizens, share control of the power of the state. It's the people. It's just what you think democracy means. As we moved into the 19th century, America became more and more democratic. With the rise of the market economy and improvements in transportation, communication, and education, many Americans pushed for political rights, namely the right to vote. Let me focus on one development for a minute, and that is the information revolution. The market revolution and the rise of political democracy led to what was called the information revolution. Because of cheap printing costs and low shipping rates, information was now accessible in a way that it never had been before. Americans had access to a wide variety of newspapers and printed materials that previously they didn't have access to. You're living through a similar revolution. Today, we are seeing a dramatic increase in the availability of information. Looking back at the information of the revolution of the 19th century, you may recognize that it had familiar benefits and drawbacks. Today, we're dealing with the consequences of cheap and easy access to information, and I think it bears some resemblance to what was happening over 2 centuries ago. I mention this because it might be a good topic for history in the headlines as you move into your second project. Okay, let's get back to political democracy. While many people are going to continue to be denied the right to vote, most notably women, many places free blacks, and definitely slaves, a policy of universal white manhood suffrage is becoming the norm at this time. Let me say that again. Universal white manhood suffrage, right? We've got a very qualified group. So it's a small, relatively small group. So what does that mean? That means by the 1820s and 1830s, all white men of age, and the age could vary, but we're talking, adult age, 20, 21 years old, would be qualified to vote in almost every state. This is a major departure. Traditionally, there had been a property requirement. In the past, white men had been required to own a certain amount of property in order to cast a ballot. The thinking was that the poor were less capable and had less of a stake in the decisions of the government if they didn't own property. But this was changing. By 1860, every state in the Union will have eliminated property qualifications for voting. This was a significant development at the time, a significant step towards democracy. Remember, the Constitution had been created to turn our country into, or make sure our country remained, a republic. And many of the framers feared the mob rule that they believed would result from democracy. So even though by today's standards, the United States was not very democratic, remember, it still limited over 50% of the adult population from voting, by the standards of the time, the move was significant. So who was left out? Well, women, black men, are going to be increasingly excluded from the political sphere. While many at the time saw a place for Black men in the body politic, there were going to be an increasing number of rules and restrictions that are going to limit the new expanded rights to white males only. In this move towards democracy, we're going to see the rise of a new kind of politician. And this is what's going to be responsible for the rise of Andrew Jackson, who Mr. McCarty will talk about in his lectures. All right, thanks for watching. We'll get into some further topics if you continue on with the videos.